theme. I think what I've loved about the book, Bigger Picture, is Pete gives us a really powerfully simple lens to view these kinds of things and understand them and talk about them.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry to start with a tough question, but oof, it was on my mind. I'm sure it's on the mind of others, but I think, yeah, Pete definitely talks about it. And you're right. It erodes trust in an institution in our government that is so key and so impactful in the decisions of how it affects each and every American. So I'm looking at our first question that was submitted tonight. And our first question tonight was submitted by Kaz from Boulder, Colorado. And so we'll get you unmuted, Kaz, and I'll also DM you your question just in case you forgot what you wanted to ask Swati.
Sure. Yeah, it was actually long, so if you can DM it to me, it'd be great.
Hi.
Hi. So I've been helping the Biden campaign since Pete dropped out. I'm sure I was one of the many that did what Pete told us to do and switched over to helping Biden through tears at first, but eventually, Yeah. So but Biden, he's having hopefully, let's knock on wood, he's so far having a very successful campaign. But he hasn't really, in my opinion, really done much to empower volunteers to organize and to be creative and kind of create their own community. So my question is, like, going forward for you and working in the arena, what is the argument for doing something different from what Biden did since he's being so successful?
Thank you for everything that you're doing, for starters, Kaz, because it's hugely important. And I know that at this stage, especially in any cycle, we oftentimes feel like we are a drop in the veritable bucket of effort, but each drop matters. I think that is the most important thing to keep at heart, especially this cycle. And I'm really grateful for it. So, and that in a lot of ways is my answer, that I think there's no single successful way to run a campaign. I think the best campaigns have attributes that acknowledge that they are distributed movements. And we used to talk about that a lot, especially in the earliest days of Pete's campaign. And some of them sort of proactively do that in better ways than others. But what we should always keep in mind is that it might be, quote unquote, a candidate's campaign, but it's our country. And it's our values and our vision of a future that we're working for. And so to some extent, can a campaign make it easier by empowering their volunteers proactively? Absolutely. But the thing that I always remind folks, whether they're working on a state legislative campaign or on a presidential, is it is easier to beg for forgiveness than it is to ask permission to do that. And you've got to sort of remember that you are ultimately the end owner. And so do as much as you can. And if there's no particular direction or guidance being offered, I'm hoping that alongside that, there's certainly nobody telling you not to do something. And so lean in and kind of create the opportunity, which I'm guessing is exactly what you've done.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we did with Bridges. I'm so glad, we were able to build this, because that gives us that, that way to, not ask permission and just go out and do it. And definitely for the down ballot candidates, we're very, appreciative that, that we had the organization there that we can step in and help them out. So yeah, for down ballot, I found that to definitely be the case.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm so glad that you're paying attention to those down ballot races and candidates, because I can see some folks commenting about that in the chat bucket, but that's where my heart and passion is, and it's where so much impact is to be had.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much, Kaz. We appreciate your question. And I think that segues into our next question that was submitted by Tracy, who's joining us from Massachusetts tonight. And Tracy, I DM'd you your question in case you forgot, and it looks like you're already unmuted, so go ahead.
I don't see my question, so
okay.
You have it there?
Yeah, I do. Tracy, your question was, in what ways would you say relational campaigning improved trust not only in the Pete for America campaign, but also in the Democratic Party in general?
It's all coming back to me now.
Tracy, I love this question. So did you notice that throughout this book, and it's part of what I loved about Pete's first book too, but I think he really brought it home. I mean, you had a chapter like chapter 3 or 4 where he's talking about things as disparate as his military service, what it was like to come out, dealing with the loss of Eric Logan in South Bend, and every like really disparate themes, but it's all stitched together by these stories, by these experiences from one person that you and I trust, right? So in many ways, there's like layered trust that's actually playing out through this book. And I think what the book is an example of relational organizing. Pete is sort of leaning into, especially for this community here, a relationship that he's already established with you because you've come to sort of respect him or pay attention to what he's doing. He's telling you stories, and from that, he's working us into these much bigger conversations about, you know, do we need to revisit the way fundamental democratic institutions are constructed in America? And, you know, maybe you're not going up to your neighbor and talking to them for the need for electoral college reform off the bat, but it's a really similar principle that you're putting to work when you relationally organize on a campaign. And today, for this season, the conversations that you're having when you relationally organize might be around, are you supporting this candidate? You know, where do you stand on this issue? But tomorrow, after the election, or really in 10 days after the election, you might be having those same conversations about, okay, so maybe you changed who you voted for. Well, are you paying attention to what they're thinking about this climate change proposal? Or do you have an opinion about what they're proposing for democracy reform? Have you thought about doing something to express your support or interest? So you're really building the pipes through which ongoing conversations about the future of our country can continue. And that, I think, is like supremely valuable because yes, we all want to win in November, but remember, this is really just the start. So you apply the same principle to the relational organizing conversations that you're having.
Yeah, and as you were saying that, it brought me back to what Raven said last week. You know, of we all have power in every moment and in every interaction we take with individuals, and it's our choice if we're going to harness that power to truly bring about change in those small but important ways as we interact with folks and have conversations, political or non. And it's awesome to see the passion for local races because that's where change truly starts to happen. And I think, Swati, as you mentioned, you know, this campaigns are about the people, and I think locally we see that even more when you get involved at the local level. So very cool, and continue to get involved and support those candidates within your local community. Our next question here is, one second. And well, actually, it looks like all the questions that were submitted prior to meeting are already asked, but I have a question for you, Swati. You got to know Pete from a couple years ago, all right? And so working on the campaign, and then as you guys went about your various paths, but going back to your days at Harvard and Oxford together, did you ever talk about the concept of trust back then? Or can you ever recall that being a part of those conversations you would have with Pete?
Not like as the 5-letter word trust explicitly, not like here's a prompt, write this essay or this book, as it were. But you know, one of the activities that Pete and I were both super involved in were the Institute of Politics at Harvard, which was this forum for students to get together and really learn about public life and public service. So it was an opportunity to spend time with public servants that were taking a sabbatical and coming to Harvard to hang out with students, and what Pete is doing now basically at Notre Dame we were students in that dynamic at Harvard. And at some point, Pete, I think, was running the Institute of Politics, and I was running the International Relations Council, which was like the foreign policy equivalent on campus. And so in those fora, we would get together and have conversations about, the 2000 election was the beginning of my freshman year, the beginning of Pete's sophomore year. So what was it to have that cataclysmic election where there was almost a question about the transfer of power? That was one of the first sort of forums where we were getting together as young 18, 19-year-olds to sort of wrap our heads around that and talk about what that meant. So elements of this theme, I think, have been present in so many of our interactions. So too at Oxford, the Rhodes community is an incredibly international one. And, you get together with South African scholars who are talking about the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions and what a post-apartheid South Africa experience was like for them. They would have very open conversations about power and equity and race in their country, which as American scholars, we weren't having those conversations back home in the mid-2000s. So there was exposure to those themes and an understanding that different communities in different parts of the world were grappling with similar issues and having very different approaches. And you can see a lot of those formative ingredients took seed, grew, and his thinking on them was really impacted, but evolved, obviously, based on the tons of experiences that he had after that as mayor and as a candidate.
Yeah, and you too have had amazing, unique experiences, just as Pete has had. And so, in the spaces that you have been in, can you just talk briefly of how you have seen trust built in other institutions, particularly non-political ones, and then just how that has affected you as an American citizen?
Sure. So I spend a lot of time when I'm not thinking about democratic politics, I spend a lot of time thinking about the climate crisis. And I can't help it these days because we couldn't breathe for 4 weeks this summer because we had such bad smoke from the wildfires just north of us in San Francisco. And, I think this is also a topic area where I don't consider it overtly political, but there's a lot of trust that's involved in conversations around climate. So for example, the other thing that I do is I help support and build technology companies, and I participate in the innovation ecosystem here in Northern California. And when we're confronted with these kinds of big problems, I think there's trust that we have an innovation ecosystem that is going to get as excited about addressing an existential climate crisis as it is about backing an ad tech company or the next big thing in social media. And some of that trust has to be built and fostered, convincing investors this is a worthwhile thing, convincing entrepreneurs that this is something they should spend their talents on and it's going to provide a reward. So, that's like another example where I think it manifests. But I think the lens is particularly powerful when we're having conversations about public goods and civic life, because it's really about trust helps us understand. It answers the question, why should I wear a mask in a public space when it's an impingement on my freedom? Well, if you think about it from a trust perspective, I think it's a much more compelling proposition.
And actually, as I asked you that question, I hope I'm connecting it correctly, but I think you tweeted actually rather recently that you were invited to an event, but you were asked to not make things political. And right after I asked you that question about it, so I just love, though, how you talked about, for you as an individual living there in San Francisco, like at the end of the day, we can't get around the fact that how trust and politics and how that does impact our everyday lives. And so I think you do a great job, and Pete as well, of communicating that and finding a way to help draw people in and get them to realize those connections. So thank you.
Oh, I'm grateful to each of you. It ties to our last question, right? Like, what's the relationship between relational organizing, on the campaign and democratic reform. Well, the more that you build a human connection to somebody, the more you can sort of do things like talk about political themes, but they'll listen because there's an understanding of a human connection to the person that they're engaging with on that theme.
Yeah. And by the way, Kaz does a relational organizing training. I know the days are numbered here, but I have talked with my colleagues and they have not yet voted. And I know how they are going to vote and what their political views are, and we need them to vote. And so just continue to talk with folks, because there's also folks who may not say, forget it, I'm just done. I had a colleague share that her daughter, who just turned 18, is someone who's just like, no, it's too much. I'm just not going to do it. And, and so just encouraging my colleague to still have those conversations and help that individual out as they process that decision. So
That's great.
There have been amazing questions that have been put in the chat. Please keep them going. Ryan Lowry, I see your hand is raised and we've been communicating a little bit, but if you could pop your question in there, we'll start forming that little line and hopefully get to as many as we can. But one question that was submitted comes from Jamel. And so Jana, could we unmute Jamel and we'll let him ask his question for Swati.
Hi, thanks very much. So one of the things that I just find ironic is that, the United States is a country of individuals. We have this, everybody, you're encouraged to be an individual, have an individualistic spirit. Even in our families, the whole notion of moving out of the house and being on your own and all of that is part of the spirit. And we're also some of the trust that we have in our government is our ability to actually be individuals and criticize it. And it's actually some of those criticisms that help actually erode other people's trust in it. And when you talk about the masks, this is a good example, and I'm glad that you raised it. I mean, Pete talks about trust in terms of vulnerability. I tend to see a lot of trust being in the ability to compromise. And, this notion of we're a nation of individuals, and yet to actually build something in common, we have to compromise that individualism. And yet it's something that in many ways, we're told not to do. So I'm just curious as to how you feel that compromise is actually a part of building trust with somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've just articulated it actually in a pretty compelling way, Jamal, and it's the nature of going from being I, the individual, to we, part of a community. It's part of the social contract, if you will, that we unofficially make by choosing to participate in a system that relies on multiple people and doesn't, where you can't just exist in perpetuity as an individual. And, I thought in the book, he does a really wonderful way of sort of getting to that theme when he talks, for example, about his military service. And, he opens with that really powerful remark saying, it used to be that the highest compliment I could give a friend at a wedding toast is that I would trust them with their life. And then I actually had to trust my life in the hands of all of these people when we were us against them in Afghanistan together. And, for him, it's that military experience, but he turns it around and says, and maybe it doesn't have to mean that we're sending young people off to war, but what if we could create some type of shared experience that allows for a common well of trust, like a national service plan or some sort of shared public service experience where, people are working in service of other people, and that becomes the common ground for us to establish that shared trust. And I think that's a really powerful idea. I mean, in this moment, there's almost no choice, right? We're up against a pandemic, a virus that's airborne. So you wear a mask because there's a fear of contracting this disease. But I think a more palatable approach is one where when we don't have our backs up against the wall in a pandemic scenario, can you proactively construct a shared experience of good feelings from which you kind of build up a bank of trust, like a national service year that most young people in America go through.
Thank you so much, and great question. Thank you, Jamel. And yeah, and service, having that opportunity to have a shared mission and to trust one another and to bring people from various diverse backgrounds together to complete that mission was something that Pete very felt strongly about, and I know is working with individuals across the country to try to get this to actually happen. And so I think that's exciting. And hopefully many of you, have had a similar experience like that throughout your life. And I think if we can just continue to share those experiences and talk about the impact it had with you and with getting to know other individuals, I think that's powerful. Julia, and I believe Julia is joining us from Colorado as well tonight. Julia put a question in the chat earlier, and so we're gonna unmute Julia so she can ask that question to you.
Hi, sorry, I'm in the middle of planning lessons. So I just ran in the other room really fast. I was curious about how Trump has instilled such trust in his base and how we bring them back to trusting American values, specifically thinking about the people that will not accept the election results unless they win, otherwise it's invalid, and how do we bring them back into trusting what they used to as American citizens?
Yeah, another really great question. And I wish there was a silver bullet answer, but again, since we're book clubbing and we're drawing inspiration from Pete's text, he makes a really interesting point, arguing less maybe that Trump has built strong trust with his followers, and he's certainly done a great job of eroding their trust in just about in most other reputable sources. And I read this as an opportunity to really lean in to anybody who's supporting Donald Trump is a human being that has relationships with lots of other people. And if even one of those is a relationship with someone who is not a Trump supporter, that's a strong case for relational organizing, for leaning in to that human connection, bonding with that person over the other things that you share in common with them, and using that as an entree point. It's kind of like hey, remember, we're part of the same community. We value the same things. And that's why I can lean into some of that trust that we have established to talk to you about this one really important thing that we kind of disagree on. So, can we get there in 8 days in time to get them to believe in the election results? Maybe not every single one of them, but it'll matter if you know some of those folks or know people who know them, that you encourage them to not shy away from the uncomfortable conversations. And if we find ourselves on the other side of November 3rd, waiting a few days for results or with questions, leaning into those human, super local, super organic relationships, that's going to matter so much more than what they're turning on their TVs and hearing or seeing.
Mm-hmm. Again, just that power of relationships that we already have, and just continue to use those shared experiences, that overlapness that Pete talks about, that we probably have more opportunities than I can say for myself that I am even aware of, to reach out and to truly connect with those who vote differently and think and have a different perspective than I do. So I think that's just a great challenge that you're providing us, Swati, and that Pete provides us within his book. And so I continue to all of us. And as you said earlier, the work doesn't end after on November 3rd. It continues, whether we have a new president or not, whether we have a new party in control of the Senate or not, and how our local government looks, because there's real work to do, and it's not just going to change because of one election. And I think, Pete continually talked about that in his campaign, especially with the office of the presidency, that it's not the only thing that matters. And there's stuff that is way bigger than just one office. Laura has a question. Laura is joining us from Massachusetts, and kind of is a great question on a different topic. So Laura, we'll get you unmuted.
Thanks, everybody. Hi, Swati. How are you? So I want to go down a different road because I'm tired. So I want to think about something that I did a lot of during the Pete campaign, which is give you money. And so
thank you for that.
No problem. And, you know, we all gave something. We all gave our time, and I know a lot of us on the call gave money. And
Yep.
you don't just give money. And I sit on a board. I sit on a not-for-profit board for gala choruses. It's the largest gay and lesbian choral association in the world. We have hundreds of choruses that are members and all that. And I'm trying to work with our various choruses. So I'm asking you for some advice, okay? And right now they can't sing because they can't come together to sing, and they need to find a way to make some money. And I thought about trust, and that these people come to shows and they trust in the quality of what they're seeing, and they pay for that, and then they give more money because the organizations give them hope. And when you were fundraising for Pete, I think a lot of people first bonded with Pete about hope that they felt. Then over time, they felt there was trust that they felt connected to him. And so I'm wondering if you see an intersection of hope and trust when it comes to fundraising. And when you're trying to create a fundraising plan, did you actually see that manifest itself in terms of how successful you were?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, hope and trust and joy, honestly, because what is it that we are hopeful for? It's invariably some point in the not so distant future where things will be better, where there's something to be brightened and more full of joy around. And so what might that mean in this context? But I think virtual fundraising opportunities that allow people to experience some of the lightness and joy that we could, I mean, candidly, we could all use more of in these times, seems like a really compelling recipe. And I would really look for ways to try and create that. Inadvertently, I think that's what we did, especially in the earliest days of Pete's campaign. I mean, we made fundraising for politics fun. And it's hard for me to emphasize how incredibly rare that is. Asking people for money is really not a particularly fun thing to do. And we made it fun to ask, and we made it fun to be asked. And it wasn't more complicated than that. So I think if you just break it down to those basic elements, and it sounds like that's what you're doing, Laura, you're definitely on the right track. And the only other piece that I would add is I think it's a particularly great time to be out there spreading joy, because people are really hungry for that. They're eager for it. And we're about to head into literally a long and dark and hard winter.
Thank you.
But last night I was watching the local news that ran late for Monday Night Football, and or Sunday Night Football. Today's Monday. But and it was this new segment, or it's a segment that I had never heard of, and I can't even remember the name of it. But you know, I put this in the chat. I really think this pandemic has shown us, not only in politics, but just in life in general, of how we can truly still have joy in new and unique ways. And I think, you know, you mentioned online fundraising and how we can be more innovative. But this one the story that stuck out to me is this younger individual had a grandmother who they could not see due to the pandemic. And grandmother was suffering from dementia. And when they would do the FaceTime calls, grandma would typically forget who individuals were and would call them back after 5 minutes ending the conversation. And repeat essentially the conversation over. And so the grandson started sending little cards each and every day or each week to grandma, and just how that changed their conversations, changed grandmother's mood, her health started to improving. And so, you know, like I challenge us as we go into these dark and very, you know, I think dangerous times this winter, how can we still spread joy with our family members, with our neighbors, and just, you know, go back to some basic ways of how we interact with folks. That was a challenge to me, and I just wanted to share that in response to Laura's question and your answer, Swati.
Mm-hmm.
I know we're getting close to that 45-minute. There's a lot of questions that came in, and unfortunately, probably won't be able to get to all of them tonight, as I want to honor everyone's time. But Christy, who's joining us for Virginia, had a great question, and so Christy, we'll get you unmuted. Hopefully we will.
Hi, Swati. Thank you for coming. This is really great. I did actually have a question. You know, we talk about trust and we're talking about silos and the fact that we don't actually trust what each other are saying. So I'm just wondering, because we have gone through a national trauma and we look around the world and the countries that have managed to survive and build something from the wreckage usually have something like a truth and reconciliation council or something that airs the grievances and kind of washes the slate clean and gives them something to start building a relationship, a sense of belonging, and a sense of trust again. Would we be able to do that here in the US? Have we gotten to the point where we can recognize that it's such a problem that we actually have to just air all the dirty laundry and say, this is what happened, and now we're going to move on?
Christy, I think you're asking a question that is so timely, and in some ways is, I think, thinking 2 steps ahead to what does life look like post the election. And you're right to ask those questions now, because I say this over and over again, but I really mean it. The whole point of running and winning elections is to be in the position to govern. And this is a core question around what does the world, what does governing after this election look like, assuming that things go favorably for us in eight days time. And I'll say this, I think regardless of whether or not there are formal mechanisms for some sort of engagement and recognition and sort of acknowledgement, reconciliation, and moving on of the challenges, and we're clearly sort of at this national moment that calls for that on issues of equity and a host of other areas. Whether or not there are formal mechanisms for it, the thing that gives me the most hope is in the last 4 years, those of us who have stepped into the arena and who have chosen to care and to do the work, we have built so many cross connections to people, to communities, to places that we weren't engaging in before. I mean, I don't know if you all remember, but it wasn't that long ago in 2016 when the map was so clearly divided between, we were looking at 2016 and saying there are red states and blue states. And the thing that you can say definitively, whether it was from the experience that we had on Pete's campaign, or the work that some of you are doing with down ballot races, or when you look at the electoral map this year and you realize how many seats Democrats are poised to pick up in districts that you could have written off as Republican only for perpetuity. We've done so much of the work to go in there and repair relationships and engage and have conversations. That's what it means to start to see more purple places on the political map. And so I think even whether or not there are formal mechanisms in government at the federal level that focus on this, the work is still in the conversations that we're having with our neighbors, with our friends, in our communities. and to bring what we maybe used to think of as those forbidden political topics into our everyday, to make them part of everyday conversations and to make the everyday relevant to the bigger political conversation. So it all comes back to the work that each and every one of you are doing on relational organizing. And it's such a powerful plug for why I know that you're tired, Christy, and you've been doing a lot of this for the last 4 years. And I'm not saying it has to be with the same intensity, but like lean into it. Think of this as a practice that you're building, just like I try and think about the yoga that I do as a practice that I want to keep up for 20 years and not just something that I got to bust through in the 30 minutes between my kids' nap times today and tomorrow. You're kind of building this practice.
I really like that idea because at times, you know, many of us in this room, we've talked of, we know the work's not done, but we're exhausted. And so like, how do we continue? But like you said, if we just make it a habit, you know, then I think that, you know, we can decide then what we're really going to intensify on, what we're going to decrease on, you know, where we're really going to put our efforts behind. But we're, as going back to what Raven said, taking advantage of every opportunity we're given to build trust and to have those conversations and positive interactions that allow us to continue to discuss and dive deeper with folks. And Swati, as you were talking about, you know, red and blue states and how that was something that, you know, was big in 2016. And now, you know, I really liked that Appendix 1 that Pete included in the book. And I purposely said that we were going to discuss that tonight because I think there's a lot of good stuff. And, you know, we may have red and blue states, and elections for president have been close, you know, within the last 20 years and seem to be very partisan divided. But the American people are unified in the fact that trust is broken and we need to get it fixed. Yep. And so I think what Pete gives us, he gives us some words and he gives us the correct framing to have these conversations with folks who agree with us and who disagree with us. And so, you know, so I really hope we dive into what Pete says. We find a way to find shared experiences with the folks we interact with on a consistent basis and take what he shares and make it personal to us, so those conversations can really connect with folks. Because people really do want to see a government that they can trust and then the government that they believe in. I think we all do, whether we're red or blue or purple, no, it doesn't matter. We want to trust, and we want to trust the government that we are a part of. We're wrapping up here because I know you have a lot to do, and we're so thankful that you chose to spend part of your evening with us tonight.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and so kind of the question that I've ended with each of our guests is, why are you choosing to trust Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and other Democrats that are running across our country?
Because I think that they are tremendous public servants. I think for such a long and storied career, especially for Vice President Biden, there's been a decision to show up even at moments that were not personally convenient for him to do work for other people. So when Pete talks about servant leadership, or when we talk about Pete as a servant leader, that is a core value that I think is embodied in this candidacy. They are kind, decent people, and most importantly, they're going to wake up every day knowing that they work for us and not the other way around. And that's why I've got a lot of trust in what those 4 years are going to look like.
Appreciate it. And then ultimately, as you just think about Pete's message in that 5-letter word, trust, what is your final message that you would love for all of us that are joining tonight here and those who aren't joining us?
You're all on the front lines of building trust. You know, I'm grateful to my friend for giving us such powerful examples from his own life and for giving us a language and a framework, as you mentioned, Wes. But it's a language and a framework that's only as powerful as people like you choose to make it by getting out there and having the conversations and doing the work. And that is American democracy at its finest. The reminder that we're all equal owners, we're all equal participants, and we've got equal power. And it matters how we choose to use it. So are we voting? Are we asking other people to vote? Are we showing up and doing the work and having conversations with people in our community about the things that we care about and we want to see in our future? So thank you guys for giving trust life. And I think what you've done on that theme for the last year plus has been amazing. I'm even more excited to see what's going to come for the next couple of years.
Thank you so much, Swati. I just appreciate you sharing your perspective and sharing your truth and experience. We really appreciate it. And thank you for what you are doing to impact your community, but also our nation through Arena and Insight. And we'll definitely share links about those two organizations so folks can learn more about it, because you're doing incredible work to truly make a difference in our country, and I appreciate it. So thank you, and keep up the work, and we look forward to hearing more from you in the years to come.
Awesome. Thank you, Wes. Take good care, everybody. Good night.
Have a good night. Well, thank you all. I just want to really make sure we get a chance to dialogue about the book, as that time has kind of been cut short. You know, the last 2 weeks, there's a lot of good stuff in here, and you asked a lot of great questions. I apologize that we couldn't get to them all, but I think that we can have a great conversation here for the next 30 minutes. And so before we do that, we do have another special guest for us tonight. And so very thankful that we are able to hear from this guest. And oh, Wes, it helps if you're logged into the right account. Hold on one second. I will, full disclaimer, it's not live, but all right. Here it is. So sharing my screen here. So Mayor Pete Buttigieg has a message for you all.
Hi,
Here
it's
it is.
Pete, and I am thrilled to be joining you all for the Building Bridge.
Let's start all from the back. Here we go.
Hi, it's Pete, and I am thrilled to be joining you all for the Building Bridges Book Club. And I'm even more pleased to know how this community from all across the country has stayed connected, engaged, and active in the months since our campaign ended, as we've gotten to work to elect Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and fantastic Democrats up and down the ticket. I also hear that you've been reading my book on trust, which I'm so thankful for. I really believe we've got to have these urgent conversations around how to build the era to come. And we've got to launch those conversations even now before the election. One of the most important ways that that happens is through organizing in every community and reaching out to every voter to show how politics is personal in every single American life. We have a chance to demonstrate and communicate that we all have a stake and we all have a say in what happens in those big white buildings in Washington, D.C. Because of all of you, I am feeling as energized and as excited and hopeful as ever about the work that we're doing right now and the successes that we can be celebrating once we come through November 3rd, thanks to all of these efforts that are taking place right now. So with hope in our hearts and fire in our bellies, let's get out there and let's write the last and most important chapter in the complicated story of 2020 together and prepare for the deciding decade ahead. Stay safe, stay motivated, and stay involved. Thank you.
And I think just hearing Mayor Pete's message and, you know, to what Swati said, they both said the same thing. It is, we have that power and we can truly harness it each and every day through the conversations that we have with folks. And it kind of sounds silly and simple, but no, that's really what we have to get back to doing, is having those conversations with folks and being able to dialogue with folks. I think that's something that we just truly lack, you know, and that's why we feel disconnected, because we stayed in our little silos, and we talked about the role social media plays in that and whatnot. So yeah, so thank you, Mayor Pete. I know you're not here, but thank you for giving that message. And I think that, yes, we have to continue to work, and we have to continue to utilize the power that we all have in this democracy. So let's get started. There were so many questions and great questions that you all submitted tonight. And so I believe the first question that was next in line comes from Teresa. And so Teresa, we're gonna get you unmuted. And if you can't recall your question exactly, I'm gonna get it submitted to you. And you might have to do a little explaining in case everyone doesn't know exactly what you are talking about in your question. Go ahead, Teresa.
She's unmuted, but I don't feel like we can hear her.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Teresa.
No.
How about I read your question? All right. Appreciate the nonverbal response. So Teresa had a great question. There was a campaign staffer from the Pete for America campaign and wrote a great article, and we'll get that. Teresa, could you put the link in the chat for everyone? Thank you. And so as Teresa was reading this article, a question that Teresa had is, how do we build trust generationally? Because we have an older generation that wants to step up and be part of the solution, other than just giving money and allowing the younger generation to step in. And so, you know, we have the younger generation, the millennials, the boomers, you know, and we kind of maybe sometimes have conflicting ideas, but how do we get it so that we can all work together to share our spaces together in a way that builds trust, even though we sometimes have competing views on how to actually get that to happen? I may not have articulated that as well as Teresa would have, but what are people's thoughts about building trust in the various generations that we have in our country? It looks like Laura has her hand raised, and thank you. If you want to contribute to this discussion, raise your hand and we'll kind of just do it in chronological order.
I was thinking a lot about that because I read, I think a lot of people read Stefan's blog post today. And one of the things I know from working with organizations that are cross-generational organizations, that level of, you know, we always talk about that conflict, that like, you know, and we always kind of use the low-hanging fruit excuse of they just work differently than we do. The millennials, they're always on their devices and they're doing too many things at once, while the Gen Xers can't like keep up with them, and this, that, and the other thing, and everyone's got all their stuff. But when I was reading Stefan's piece and reflecting actually on tonight, I was actually thinking about how like we don't actually trust the other generation to do it right. We don't actually consider that the new way or the updated way has value, while at the same time, the newer generations don't see the value in the old way. So there is this kind of, you know, if you take it out of politics and you just kind of think about the people you work with every day, and think about the people who impact you every day, and you think, okay, what is that? And I think that there is that layer of, we have to build trust of, I appreciate what you do, and I like that you do that way. It's not so much you want to be told how to do it, you want them to understand why you do it. And then you build trust in the why more than in the how. if that makes sense, at least in my mind. Because we get so hung up, like how many times do we have people, you know, who can't figure out how to use, I mean, technology is the easy thing, right, to talk about, because there's certain generations, like I literally am the 411 call for my father who's 75 years old, who doesn't know how to use his devices. And he calls me and he says, all right, walk me through this. I'm like, oh my God, you know, and now I just turn the phone over to my daughter who's 13 and say, tell grandpa how to run the computer, please, because I can't do this anymore, right? We use that as an excuse because it's technology and you can easily say, well, I don't get it. Well, but it goes beyond technology. It's how we go about our day to day. And I think there is an opportunity to build trust around the why, because we never talk about the why. We talk about the how. And I think the why actually is a more compelling conversation than the how. That's my thoughts.
And I think there's probably some consultant who makes buco's money for this creation, but they ask, what is your why? And if you know what your why is, that really can influence your interactions with folks, whatever the interaction may be and whoever it may be with, but always understanding what that why is. So thank you, Laura. It looks like Jordan, and I believe Jordan's joining us from the great state of Nebraska. And so Jordan, we'll get you unmuted. Had to throw that in there.
Hello, yeah, thank you. Nebraska area here. I love how you put that, Laura, because just thinking about the why, and also just every time I think about intergenerational relationships and building those, I immediately think about, I'm an artist and an art teacher, and education is really important to me, and also art is very important to me. And so I think about the strong influence of my mentors, and not just my mentor, but my mentor's mentor. And I think about the generational influence that I can see visibly in the artwork, where I may not mimic my mentor's work per se, like our works don't look alike, but my artwork looks a lot more like his mentor, because he was taking from the conversations and ideas of his mentor, which then he shared with me. And so I'm taking from those conversations and ideas, but he was never trying to look like his mentor's work, and I was never trying to look like my mentor's work. And so this idea of like, I don't want to be taught how to do something, but I want to have a conversation about why. I love exactly how you put that, because when Wes you brought up the question, I was thinking about this mentor relationship, and like, how can we encourage people of the importance of these relationships when it's not like always about, oh, you know exactly how to do this, so I want to know how to do this. It's a matter of, you have wisdom and you have experience and you have thoughts and conversations that have developed just because you've interacted with more people than I have. So how can we keep building on that? Because it's not just to tell me exactly how it is, it's to increase that building on relationships and building on more minds coming together down the line. So even when I go talk to another generation, like my students, it's not, this is how it is. It's so that they can add to that and keep forming it. So I don't know if it's like a matter of getting out of this, like, trust in the wisdom. But I feel like that's a short, or it's a cheap view of trust. If we just say, trust your elders because they know from their experience how it is. It's again, trusting in the why, and then building off of your experience, and then finding other people to talk with.
I really like that. And I don't know you, but I know you are making a difference if that's the way you handle your classroom. So thank you, Jordan. And next, it looks, oh, we got quite a few. I am going to limit it to Jamel and Tracy, and then hopefully, Aaron, we can have you join us in our next conversation. All right. Jamel.
I'll just be really quick. It was Shannon who mentioned this in the chat. You know, the book club is a really great example of people on an well, you know what I mean, you know, coming together. And I just find in the workplace, you know, I work with people who are, you know, in their 20s to their 80s, and age just disappears in those situations. Yes, it's something you acknowledge every now and then, but when you're sitting around and you have a common purpose, you know, it's something that it melts away. So I just think that a lot of it is just, you know, finding places where you interact intergenerally. You know what I mean? And that's it. And you know, Christy mentioned, you know, national services potentially being a part of that too.
Thank you, Jamel, and thank you, Shannon. I'm glad to hear that this book club is something of deeper value than just talking about what Pete Buttigieg had to say. So thank you. It means a lot to me personally. We're going to get Tracy unmuted.
I think the whole intergenerational thing was what initially brought me into this campaign. It kind of dovetails with what I've been doing at work. I mentor a lot of young reporters that I have for years. And I remember back when Bill Clinton was first elected, he was the first boomer president, and people didn't seem to trust that. I mean, it just, one generation was hesitant to give way to another. And it's the natural order of things. And I didn't see how someone as intelligent and with so many good ideas as Pete should be forced to wait his turn if he had something to say that was crucial to the moment now. And it was a campaign where the okay boomer thing was just a joke. It wasn't as serious as it was as some other ones.
Yeah, and we definitely see that, you know, where young folks are really stepping up, and you know,
everything from Pat Preventer to kids who aren't even in high school yet helping on this campaign. It was really cool.
Yes, and we see that in various campaigns across the country, and so, you know, I think it's a work that all generations have to do, is really how do we allow others to utilize their power to truly make it, you know, allowing others to step into that power and accumulate it and use it. And so as mentor, you know, and as teachers and parents and whatnot, we really have that ability to share that power and allow.
It all comes down to listening a lot too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you, Tracy. All right, well, let's get Aaron in, and then after that, it is going to be Deborah. We'll get you unmuted. Go ahead, Aaron.
Hi, guys. Sorry, I don't have my camera on. I have a whole lot of Halloween going on at my house right now, so I think I'm under an orange light. But I wanted to say I was so glad that we touched on Stefan's post today and talking about intergenerational things. I'm very lucky to have been raised by a boomer family in the deep South who taught me through their adoption of a Vietnamese child when I was tiny about caring about beyond what we can see. And it's not about not seeing color. It's not about not seeing the differences. It's about seeing them and appreciating them. And Wes, you just said a minute ago about stepping into power. And I firmly believe that the okay boomer generation, which I can't, it drives me nuts because I think about my parents who fought for the ERA and so many other things. But what they want is for us to step into the power that they're trying to hand off to us. And I have a boomer mom who's in her late 70s, and my dad has passed away, who love their Gen Xer kids and are proud of their millennial and Gen Zer kids who are LGBTQIA. And they want to continue to fight. They want us to fight. They want those generations to fight. And that is what I see in Building Bridges. And it makes me so proud to know all of you and to be a tiny part of this who's just written some postcards and not done nearly as much as I should have done leading up to this. But I'm proud of what we're doing. And I just want to say thank you to all of you. It makes my heart very full. And I'm grateful that we're all ready to say we're up next, that I can look at my niece tonight in Florida and say, understand that the confirmation of Amy Cohen Barrett does not mean that your rights end here, because there are powerful and important voices who are going to fight next to you, who are going to fight for you. And I will fight until the day I am 6 feet under to make sure that everybody that I love and people who I don't know don't have to fight for basic human rights. And I just thank you guys. Thank you guys for what you're doing. It means so much to people like me who are rural Democrats, and God bless America, I live in the reddest part of Virginia. But Southern rural Democrats aren't Yetis. We're out there. You just don't see us very often. And just thank you guys. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Erin. And, you know, you are doing work that is just as important as someone like me who's living in urban blue little dot in a sea of red. And so no matter where you are, we all have that ability to influence our communities. And so the work that you are doing, the conversations you are having, the interactions you have each and every day in your community are making a difference. So thank you as well. We appreciate it. Let's get, if we could get Deborah unmuted. Deborah Foca.
Hey there.
Hi, Deborah.
I had quite a conversation on Twitter with Stefan about this. So I'd like to just make a few comments, but I'm 66, so I'm a boomer, and I see many generations on in this group. And, you know, I think that one of the ways that we build bridges between generations is to also recognize how much we have in common. And frankly, I feel like I have a lot more in common with all of you and my adult children than my parents did with me. I mean, for example, we can all go to a Led Zeppelin cover band. Like, we are very united in music. I will bet you I could name 5 albums that I had in my college dorm, and most of you have them too. And I think that, you know, we have something very special there. You know, when I was not a boomer, you know, my parents were Frank Sinatra. And they didn't, you know, there was a whole generational issue about the Beatles and these terrible haircuts, where I feel like, you know, our generations are much more blended. We're much more fashion tolerant than generations previously have been. And I think we also have a lot in common politically. I mean, we have James Clyburn and we have Walter Clyburn. And we had Cleveland sellers and we have Bacardi sellers. And we're all trying to get the same things done, you know, and so some of us boomers, you know, maybe we didn't get everything done. And maybe, you know, you can't buy a house and I could buy a house, right? I mean, by the time I was my son's age, I owned 5 different houses at different times. He doesn't have a house, he's renting. So part of, I feel like what Stefan was saying, at least particularly on our Twitter, was, you know, we had all this great stuff and then we ruined it. Well, guess what? I bought houses, you know, I bought a house when I was 22. I lost all my equity in 2008. So, you know, we have a lot in common. And I think that if we set aside all of this is X and this is Z and this is millennial and I'm a boomer, like, what's the point? What's the point? You know, everybody on this call is united because we have a much bigger controversial issue of our entire democracy in front of us. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. And I don't know if Stefan's article has been posted in the chat, but if it hasn't yet, could we make sure it is, just so folks who haven't had a chance to read it can read it later on? Thank you. And, you know, and I think Swati, you know, talked about that, and Pete talks about it in his book, is those shared experiences and really finding those. And, you know, just like art, I think music is a great connector piece as well, that, you know, and music has led to powerful change socially, culturally, and politically in our country. So thank you for bringing up the power of music as well. All right, Ryan posted a question in the chat and also submitted one earlier that we hadn't had a chance to get to. So could we unmute Ryan, who also resides from the great state of Nebraska? Woohoo, Nebraska!
Yeah. All right. First of all, this has been a really fun conversation to be a part of, especially this week. So many great conversations, especially Christy, your comment about Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. Some people might think that's kind of like out there, but I was watching something earlier today. Sorry, Wes, for hijacking this portion of my question, but Christy, you brought up something that reminded me. There was something I was watching, I don't know what it was, but somebody had mentioned going back to the Nixon administration and how Ford pardoned Nixon after Watergate and his resignation. And then we move to Iran-Contra, and you have Reagan, who pardoned some of the individuals that were involved in that. And you have Obama making a conscious effort not to investigate further some of the potential war crimes that occurred under the George W. Bush administration. All of these things over time have led us to, the argument was that they've led us to this point now where we have an administration that can brazenly break norms, break the law, and seemingly feel like they can get away with it. And what's the natural outcome of that is that, you know, I think we've even had conversations about this during the primaries. Some of the candidates were asked, you know, what would you do with the Trump administration post election? And, you know, a lot of them was, you know, what do we do to get the country to move forward, move on? And I think putting the United States in comparison with a country like South Africa, you know, it's hard for us to recognize that those two might be similar enough to hold something like a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But, you know, I think those are legitimate questions that we have to start asking ourselves, because if it continues to, you know, go this route, those are certainly questions that we have to think about. So, Christy, I just wanted to give you a shout out. I thought that was really timely, and really like that question. So let me make mine brief, although it's not brief, sorry. My question was, political institutions are notoriously difficult to change. And I think that helps, that consistency helps to ensure Americans can trust them no matter who's president. However, we've seen many political institutions, the State Department, Department of Justice, Congress, take such sharp departures from norms recently that I'm afraid that not only Americans, but the global community has lost trust in our institutions, and it will not easily be earned back. What do you see as the most consequential impact of this? And will it take more than just an administration to win back that trust? So that kind of like roundabout way back to Christy's point, that there's maybe something more than just a new administration to gain trust back? Are there other things that we have to do to get trust back?
Well, Ryan, I'll quickly interject, and then other folks, if you want to join in, make sure you raise your hand or communicate in the chat. But, Pete just tweeted out about an hour ago, but tweeted out that Republicans have no more standing on talking about norms. And, and I think that's just having those critical conversations. And will we elect politicians who are able to state what has really happened, and will the American people hold them accountable? That's the next question, I personally. But yeah, Pete just talked about there is no standing amongst Republicans anymore about norms, as they have destroyed many of those. Shannon has her hand raised. We'll get you unmuted, Shannon. And thank you, Ryan, for your great question.
Hi, I was thinking back to what we were talking about, truth and reconciliation. I'm real clear on the idea that we need to bring to light all the things that have been done wrong, because that's how you get around to correcting things. But how far do we want to go? How much energy and time do we want to invest in going beyond just airing those wrongs to dealing with holding people accountable and making restitution for those wrongs? I just wanted to raise the question more than try to get it answered tonight, but to get us thinking about that.
Shannon, that's a great question. And I think it looks like Ryan kind of has a response, but yes, I think that's definitely something we have to think about. And for me, I think it just goes back to belonging. And until every American feels belonged, I think those questions should be raised and should be dealt with in order to ensure every American feels that their story and their experience and their perspective is being heard and being addressed. Go ahead, Ryan.
I think you bring up a great point, and it leads right back into Shannon's question. And my take on that is we've never, as a country, done a great job of fully recognizing the wrongs that have taken place, going all the way back to, folks coming in and encroaching on indigenous lands, the slave trade. None of that has ever been fully recognized and those atrocities been acknowledged. So I don't think we've ever done a good job. And I think that's what makes it particularly difficult for us to think about this time now doing it, because we're looking at a particular point in time and not systematically as a whole how we as a country have not addressed some of the things that would really allow us to fully recognize the danger in eroding norms so easily, and the causes that would bring us to those points. So it's not a great or a hopeful answer, but I think until we can fully recognize, some of the really dark spots in American history, I don't know that we would be able to use something like a Truth and Reconciliation Commission for something like the Trump administration. I think it goes beyond that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And there's a lot of, sorry, I'm trying to read the chat because there's been some things there. And, and Christy, not only going back from when our country was created, but we have, recent things where, how Chinese weren't allowed to be citizens until the 1940s, how during the 1940s, Japanese Americans were put into internment camps, and we're just now having those conversations about injustice in our country. And, and I think we just got to continue to talk about it, because not everyone agrees that this is an issue. And so the more people's stories come out, just as Pete talked about in chapter 4, for all those brave, courageous women who were willing to share their experiences about that despicable human being who doesn't even deserve to have his name uttered. But if we don't get those stories out there, if we don't have the conversation, if people don't feel heard and seen, we're really doing a great injustice. And so I think just continuing to allow folks to share, I think is really important. And going back to your question, Ryan, if our government can play a role in that, I think that would be huge in installing trust in those institutions. Jamel has his hand raised, and Andy does as well. We're going to go to Andy first, and then we'll go to Jamel. All right, looks like Jamel's unmuted. So Jamel, start us off.
I was just going to say to Ryan's point, even though we haven't addressed those issues, I actually, having lived in other parts of the world, I actually have a lot of faith in this country's ability to ask the questions that need to be asked, because I don't know of many other places where there's the same type of level of introspection and challenging and things like that. So even though we've got, we haven't done what we need to do, there's a chance for it. Honestly, and in many other parts of the world, there's not even a chance. They don't, there's just so much more acceptance of things. And I think that, part of our strength is that we challenge ourselves on this front, that we don't have all the answers, but at least, there's a good portion of the country that asks, that wants the questions asked. So I don't give up on that. I actually think that, we may not get all the way there, but in comparison with other parts of the world, getting halfway there is even an accomplishment.
Thank you, Jamel. Let's hear from Andy.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you. I'm really tired, worn out, but for those who don't know, I'm working on a congressional campaign, and it's the last week before the election, and it's crazy. And something that I've noticed talking to voters all across my very red district is that people who are open to talking to you about these sort of things and are willing to listen will not always come from the Democratic Party. It doesn't, we tend to get in our little bubbles, and we forget that there are people out there that are just trying to live their lives. And I've talked to a lot of Republicans this week and last week in particular, trying to flip votes for my candidate. And it's hard. And there are some that are just, I feel like they're lost, and it's not, and I used to get so angry at them, and now I just feel sad. But there are some that are open to listening to a calm and measured voice. And I think that if we can, especially if we get, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in there, who will be a calming presence and not this riling up presence, I think that'll go a long way to helping us rebuild trust with people that we may think right now will never trust us again, or they are putting their trust in the wrong places. But it's going to be a really, really long road. But it's not, I don't think all is lost. I'm sure that our friend Vanessa can tell us the same thing. She talks to Republicans all the time. There are people that are out there that you just have to find the right hook, the right way to talk to them, the right issue, the thing that will get them to listen. And once they start listening, they will at least talk to you. And I don't think it's all lost. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, thank you, Andy, and you and Jamel. And I think it's important that we continue to have hope. And America is full of mistakes. And from our very beginning, before we even a country, and as we started to be a country, and we'll continue to make mistakes because we are human. But within that, America has that promise and those ideals that allow us to have those critical conversations, that allows the people to harness their power to truly bring about change locally and nationally. And so, Pete, on page 178, he says that trust in one another matters because we do not have the energy or the tools to be constantly verifying what others will do, particularly our institutions and our government. And so as we talk about these big, complex questions, know that, as Raven said, and it's hit me, and it's something I've been reflecting on, we have power and we have the ability to build trust amongst one another, amongst the people we work with, amongst the people that live next to us. It's just, will we take advantage of those opportunities? Will we take acts of hope to even engage with folks and whatnot? And so my challenge is to all of us that lean on one another, because many of us are tired, and many of us, our trust banks may be low right now. And so lean on one another and use that energy so that we can continue to spread trust in our very nuclear relationships that we call family, and in our neighborhoods and in our communities, because I just think that it is so critical, and it all starts with us. And so how are you going to use your power, use your influence, share that with others, and continue to build trust in each and every day moving forward? So it is 9:08 my time, 10:08, 8:08, 7:08, 6:08, or wherever you may be. It is 08. So I want to honor our time. We have things to do, campaigns to go work for, individuals to take care of, to reach out to. And so thank you all so much. I know that someone put in the chat, where are those videos that you promised about past interactions? Actually, Mayor Christine's is on social media and on YouTube. I forgot to actually email you those. So I'm working on that. So please, thank you for your grace and forgiveness. I will get those out. I will also get Mayor Pete's message that we shared tonight. I'll get that out and shared with everyone. And we'll have our conversation with Swati tonight as well. So thank you all so much. I really hope that, as Swati said, Pete gives us the framework in this book. He gives us the words, but now it's up to us. Are we going to utilize them in our daily interactions with folks? Are we going to take advantage of what he has to share and connect it to our own personal lives? So thank you all so much. We are I'm just going to change the settings here. Actually, Jana, you have to change the settings where people can unmute themselves, because I'd love to hear your voices as we all say farewell tonight. But before we do, please do not leave, because I have one other quick thing that I wanted to share. There are, I think there's 8 days left where people can vote, including Election Day. So how can you get involved to make a difference in these last few days? Well, one thing that we're doing to continue that belonging and joy is we're having an election night watch party. That will be on Tuesday, November 3rd. We'll start it off at 7 p.m. Eastern time. Feel free to jump in whenever you're available so we can have joy and belonging. We'll play some games. We'll share election results as they come in throughout the night. But we hope to see you there. But we can still make a difference. Tomorrow night, we have opportunities. We have Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday opportunities for you to make a difference in local races throughout our nation. So we hope you'll be able to join us. Kaz, who's been with us tonight, thank you, Kaz, for what you're doing. I really encourage you to check out that relational organizing conversation that and training that's happening on Wednesday night. And then she has an excellent grassroots discussion series. So if you know someone who's a non-voter, please check it out, because I think Kaz has some great information that will help you connect with non-voters that are in your life. Give us a follow on social media so you can see those videos. And stay connected as we head into these final days, but also as we gear up for the work after the election. So we have a website, buildingbridgesforamerica.com. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I got to go. You got to go. We're text banking for Doug Jones tomorrow and others. So yeah, you can all unmute yourselves. Thank you all so much. Have a great night.